Hi, everyone. So welcome to Lead TV. We're going to have a good discussion today with a guest of mine that I met. Well, I didn't physically meet him, maybe in formation or whatever, but I've met him back in 2002, 2003, when I was a young enlisted fellow. We've got as our guest today, Colonel Retired Robert Sinkler, and he's going to have a good discussion today with us on American Courage. So I hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and let's go do it. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Colonel Retired Robert Sinkler. Hey, sir, what's going on?
Hey, Otis. Hey, it's great to do something with you again after all these years.
After all these years, right? I mean, yeah. who would have thought that we would have ever been at this point again? But it's something that I'm eternally thankful for. So, I really appreciate you taking the time to come and be on my podcast that I've got going here. It's been a really good success. We've actually chatted before regarding things that we may have seen online, things that we have seen on social media, and it's good that we're actually having now the discussion where others could join in the discussion and be part of, the dialogue, the necessary and needed dialogue. So I wanted to just say thank you for coming and joining with the discussion today.
Well, thanks again, Otis, for having me. So yeah, just for everyone that's listening, Otis has no problem at all letting me know when one of my social media posts might cause some concern with someone. So I appreciate that honest feedback and his comments from time to time.
Yeah, I think honesty is always the best policy in regards to your friends on social media, especially your friends who you hold to a higher level. And definitely I hold you to a higher level simply because of the leadership I've been under from you before in my previous enlisted life. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with me today. But sir, before we go into the presentation and the slides and the information and all those things that are to come, can you kind of give us a little bit of a background of who you are, where you're from, all those different things?
Sure, really quickly. I grew up in Central Illinois, a small farming community, actually. And I went off to college. I became a petroleum geologist. I wanted to get in the oil industry. And you know how life doesn't always work out the way you envision when you're, after you leave high school and get into college. So anyway, I ended up joining the Illinois National Guard for a little extra money while I was in college. And I really enjoyed what I did. And I found myself actually going on active duty after I graduated from college. So I became a combat engineer. And so went to Europe, and actually I spent some time with 1st Infantry Division over the course of my career, 3rd Infantry Division, 4th Infantry Division, 1st Armored Division. Served with the 5th Corps in Germany, served some time with 7th Army in Germany, was the Crisis Action Plans Branch Chief in U.S. Central Command when we were in 2003 to 2005 timeframe, and then spent a little time in the Pentagon, and just had a wonderful time in the Army. Left the Army in 2013 and went right into kind of the corporate world and joined an organization that had about 4,000 employees, and there was I made a couple of career changes since then, and now I'm the Chief Operating Officer of a company called Streamside Systems, and we do work all over North America primarily, but have done work as far away as New Zealand. So, a little bit about me.
Okay, excellent. So you've had the opportunity to, be a successful officer in the military, and obviously now you're a successful civilian in the civilian side of town. Through your time in leadership, both military and civilian side, can you kind of recall to us mentors that you've had in your time that helped guide you towards, being a successful military individual and civilian individual?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that when later on in kind of our discussion. but a couple of people that have really made a difference in my life and that I've never forgotten. And some of the things that they did for me and with me and to me are kind of stuck with me in a real positive way. I do think that I learned more from the people that I served than those that were maybe superiors along the way, and that's kind of the way I viewed it. And I think that's I think that's probably the best way to describe it. But I just had some wonderful mentors, wonderful, really trainers from the very beginning, and they were really all the key. They were clearly the key to my success along the way, both in the military and outside the military also.
Got it. So, you've had these individuals that stood out in your time, both military and outside of the military. I'm sure it's something that you kind of rely on, especially during those tough times. And it's something that, myself, I've relied on mentors that I've had during my time, people who, pushed me ahead, especially even in this podcast world where I was not really well known about, but, they've pushed me ahead as far as, learning as much as I possibly can and doing the right things whenever it is that I have those opportunities to do the right things. And speaking of right things, you actually came to me and actually proposed, hey, let's have a discussion that's needed and necessary. What motivated you to, I guess, have that moment of let's have this discussion?
Yeah. So, and this was just something that was on my mind, and Otis and I connected on social media about another issue or something that I posted, and there were some things on my mind, especially in light of some of the recent social unrest issues, and it really concerns me that we don't have the moral courage at the individual level, especially outside the military, and a lot of the tragedies that have happened over the last several weeks would not have happened if people would have had enough courage to step up and step in and take some action in their own hands and prevent terrible things from happening. So I just thought that I would kind of lead off with that, and then I want to talk a little bit about my kind of a shock when I entered the corporate world and how it really operates, which was so much different than the way the U.S. Army operates and the Department of Defense operates when it comes to diversity and inclusion. A big change and a big difference.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Let's go head first into it, and I will go ahead and put up the slides to share on our screen. And what we're going to do during this discussion, I will leave the slides as a full page, and then once I see something on there, or if I see a comment or a question that's being asked on our side panel, I'll go ahead and bring it up on the page. Okay, sir? So let's go ahead and start off with slide 1.
Sure. Yeah, and I really want to, as I mentioned, I want to discuss two things. One is individual and personal courage, and then the next thing I want to discuss is just achieving diversity in the workplace based on lessons that I learned while I was in the military. But first, I'll start out with personal courage. And I know this is just one of the Army's 7 fundamental values, but I do think that in the corporate America and in the population in general, that we are clearly lacking not necessarily physical courage, but the moral courage to address a lot of the issues that we're facing today. And I don't necessarily think it's rewarded and promoted as it should be in corporate America. You can go to the next slide if you want to.
Got it. Let's jump into the next one.
Yeah. So, and I'll use this recent tragic, the recent tragic event of the George Floyd murder to kind of illustrate my point. And I really don't want to talk any at all about Derek, but I do want to talk about the 3 other individuals, 3 other policemen, the 3 other people in uniform that were there that could have stepped in. It's really kind of generally talk about Toe and Thomas and Jay Alexander, the 3 folks that are in the circle there. And when I saw what had happened on the news, the first question that came to my mind, or the thing that disturbed me the most, was that how in the world could 3 Americans stand by and let a murderer that was in their midst slowly squeeze the life out of George Floyd, and not really do anything at all, or anything be effective in putting a stop to it. And this went on for about 8 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're all, as Americans, yeah. Yes. So I think we're all very, go ahead.
No, you were saying you think us all as Americans, what?
Oh, I just think, we were all very angry about that. And I don't think there's any issues with that. But I think for those of us that have been soldiers before, we would never expect 3 of our soldiers to let their team leader get by with something like that or do that, or their squad leader do something like that. So why did this happen? In a police force, so why did this happen in the United States? And I do think there's some lessons that I learned while I was in the military that would head this kind of stuff off, and there clearly needs to be some things done to help address that.
Got it. So I would think, and this is just maybe my own opinion, but the other 3 officers may have felt pressure to not do anything to prevent the initial guy from squeezing life out of George, simply because of that sort of peer pressure. As an officer, you've got to defend your officer co-worker above all else, even if you see something wrong being done. And you've got the civilians that were checking out what was going on and screaming and pleading, "Hey, stop what you're doing!" But the other officers didn't really react or anything like to that. So civilians as a whole, we're limited in what we can, physically do or whatever. But those other officers may be held under that sort of hypnosis of blue support. How exactly is that officer who's under that sort of hypnosis, you could say, what are they supposed to do at a time like this?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think peer pressure is the strongest force in any kind of organization. And I think all of us that have been in the military recognize that. And it can be a force of good and it can be a force of bad. And I think in this case, the peer pressure was clearly a force of bad. And what can we do in our organizations, and what can we do in our society to make sure that there are enough courageous individuals out there that are willing to step up and put a stop to things when they have an opportunity? And obviously it broke down in this particular case.
I've seen examples where officers report wrongdoing going on, and some have lost their pensions, like 1 year from retirement. Some have lost their pensions. Some have had literally rats thrown on their vehicles. Some have, been ostracized by their coworkers and not trusted. It is actually quite ridiculous if something like that could actually be going on. But, that's a policy and police culture thing that needs to be addressed at their end. And of course, us as civilians, we can have some sort of control in that. But I believe the control comes from making sure we vote the right individuals in office who have control of these police policies and procedures.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have a question. Go ahead, sir.
No, I was just going to say, I really do think some changes can be made at the individual level too. And I think it really is for a top to bottom approach to addressing a lot of the issues in our nation. And I don't think things can necessarily be solved from the top down, and I don't necessarily think they can all be solved I think we are abrogating our responsibility as citizens if we think that everything can be resolved at the voting booth. I think there's more to it than that, and I'm not saying that's not important, but and I'll talk a little bit about on the next slide about some things that went on in my life that I think helped me and help prepare me for kind of being that agent of change that I really needed to be along the way. And there's several opportunities that everyone faces in their life where they can make a difference, but it does take that moral courage. But I think people need to be willing to make that kind of sacrifice. So even if it requires a little, if your workers may not accept you into their fold, I think you need to be willing to kind of step up. I think that would make a difference in a lot of ways.
Tracking. So we've got an actual question and an actual comment that's already been posted on the discussion. So let's go ahead and bring it up. So the first question that we see, do you think a uniform training standard would have been beneficial to allowing these officers to act? Keeping in mind he was their training officer, they potentially had their careers in their hands.
Yeah, and that's a real tough situation. And I think a lot of things will come out, through the trial and over the next several months that I'm not aware of. But and Otis, I mean, when you join when you join the Army, you're taught early on that there are illegal orders and there are illegal actions, and there is a uniform code of military justice, and there is Geneva, conventions which really guide the law of land warfare. So, and you're taught those early on. I mean, your very first few weeks in the military, you're introduced to that. So I would hope, and if it's not being done, when police recruits first enter into their training, I mean, that should be one of the first things that they're taught, and they should know, and they should be given the power and authority at that time to be able to step in and know where their authority is and lies to put a stop to I would say illegal acts, and they need to be given that kind of authority early on, even if they've got someone that's wicked in their midst. So yes, I think some sort of uniform training standard is extremely helpful. I know it is in the military, and how that is employed, and whether it's at the state level or federal level. I'm not an expert on in policing for sure, but there needs to be a standard, and I think that's one of the first things that everyone needs to be trained on and taught from day one when they enter into the police.
Tracking. So we have two comments. Let's go ahead and pull them up. The first comment is from Ms. Latasha Watson. She says, we can't be so hung up on the code, but refocus on our moral values, doing what's right and holding people accountable. I agree with that. Fully agree with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir. What do you think?
There's no question for that. But I do think just based on the previous comment, I agree with that too. There needs to be some sort of standard where standards can be established, just so there's no ambiguity in what is expected out of people that serve our nation in uniform. So I think the part of eliminating the ambiguity is important, and then getting to what I'm going to discuss a little bit later is I think doing what's right. Sometimes there's a little bit of judgment, individual judgment in what's right and what's wrong in different circumstances. But I think people need to be empowered and supported when they are doing what they think is right. And as far as holding people accountable, I think we are all, this is just as American citizens, and whether it's in your workplace or your social circles, we are, in the end, we are all accountable to each other. And that's the way I approach things in the business that I'm in. We are accountable to each other in a wide variety of ways. And I think we have a responsibility to hold each other accountable at that first level. It doesn't need to get out of hand. I mean, we can hold each other accountable early on, and make sure that we don't run into any of the issues which I'll talk about in a few minutes.
Absolutely. And we've got actually a comment that kind of blends the two things that you were talking about, where policy and personal accountability may come at a head. And it comes from Colonel Retired Fred Baskin. He says, it's not a matter of training standards, but choices of individuals. That training standard may be something that may take someone's life. Say, for instance, the knee on the neck training standard. Was that a training standard beforehand? Or could that individual have chosen to not use that sort of procedure to bring down Brother Floyd as he passed away? But let's go ahead and jump in to the next slide, sir.
Okay. And I just want to Sure. Yeah, and I just want to talk a little bit about my father. My father worked in a factory worker. He spent a little bit of time in the military in the early 1960s, but he he really spent a lot of time teaching me and demonstrating to me the value of courage. And in his mind, courage was always being willing to step up and tell the truth to power, and that it was an individual responsibility to do that, and it was a choice whether or not you would step in when you needed to. And he really put a lot of emphasis on those that may not have the same advantages that you, or may be in a more difficult family situation or economic situation than you. He always kind of impressed upon me that it's a responsibility of every American, is the way he described it, to kind of help everyone along, and don't ever hesitate stepping in when something was not quite right, or there was something evil or something not appropriate going on. And a little bit about him too. He was well known for his random acts of kindness and just doing wonderful things for everyone in the community that he come in contact with. But he was a great role model. But I will talk a little bit about my first company commander, who was in the Illinois National Guard. And this is something that he impressed upon me early on, was that that he wanted every leader in his organization. And he was a former Vietnam veteran, so he had a lot of combat experience. But he impressed upon me and everybody in his organization that one of the most important things that was expected of us was to be able to really have enough courage to really speak that truth to power, or if there was something inappropriate going on, he wanted everybody to have enough courage to just step in and stop it, even if it was him. And he would occasionally, and he would test you as a, he would say something that he knew was illegal, immoral, or unethical in a room, and if you did not speak up, he would call you in after the meeting was over with and said, "Listen, I did that intentionally, and I was expecting you to speak up." And unfortunately, I did every time that something like that went on. Others in the organization didn't, and he didn't have much tolerance for people that allowed him to get by with saying something that he shouldn't have. And I don't know if that test would it be appropriate in today's training environment, but it sure impressed me, and it sure made a point with me that I've taken with me everywhere I've gone in my life.
Can I ask, sir, can you recall some of those, or maybe a story that where you did the hard right instead of the easy wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought a little bit about this beforehand. Yeah, that's a good question.
Let's get back to. I'll get back to you on that.
That's a good question. I think there are numerous occasions. I think there were clearly every level of command for me. I think there were a few great examples, but most of them were handled. I think one-on-one with the individual when I could, but yeah, there were several.
Tracking. Yeah. Do you want to jump into the next slide?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit and go back to I'll just mention on the previous slide. I think George Patton is is known for making the comment that if everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. And I think that's what we're getting at here is, when everyone is heading down a path or in a direction that they shouldn't be, that someone needs to kind of step in, and that kind of behavior needs to be valued. I'll just go to the next slide and really quickly. So this really gets, in my mind, this gets to what groupthink is all about. And I'm more interested in the groupthink right now in this context that results in poor moral judgment. And there's been numerous examples here in the area that I live. And just for everybody that's on the call, I live right south of Minneapolis, St. Paul. I live in a city on the Mississippi River. And so some of the things that have gone on recently have been relatively close to home. And then I'll just go on to the next slide.
Got it.
So how do you create people and individuals and leaders that are willing to maybe head in a little bit different direction when they're needed. And I think all three of the officers that I highlighted on an earlier slide, I think and I do know, based upon what I've been read in the newspapers, that some of them actually spoke up, but they didn't have they didn't really take the action necessary to prevent some evil, wicked thing from happening. But how do you create people that are willing to do that? And I think that's kind of the big I think the big challenge that we've all got. And recently, just 2.5 miles away at a shopping center area that near my home, there was a peaceful protest going on just a few weeks ago, and someone showed up. A white guy showed up to participate. He was armed and with a rifle, and he ended up shooting one of the peaceful protesters, and actually ended up killing a young African American girl. And someone then should have stepped in and said, "Hey, this is a peaceful protest," and had enough courage just to tell him, "Hey, leave your rifle in the car." But no one did, and he was walking around with that. And there's just all kinds of opportunities like that. I think that people can that opportunities sometimes that we miss. And we really need to really reinforce that everybody has an individual responsibility to kind of step in when things are getting out of control.
Excellent. You want to jump into the next one, sir?
Yeah, let's move on to the next slide.
Okay.
And I would suggest that and I know this is just a little cartoon, but I would suggest that we need to watch out and be really careful that we don't stifle all offensive speech, because I do think that there are some times when the risk of offending someone is worth it, and to move things forward. And my concern is there are a lot of forces at play all over the place in our society, in our workplace, where some of the things that are going on and some of the cultures that are developed are really stifling honest dialogue and communication. And I think it's offensive speech should clearly not be promoted. It should not be rewarded. But I do think that it should be excused when someone honestly and sincerely is trying to make a point that they think is important to be made.
I think that's where some people may disagree with that, because it's how do you know and how do you decipher when someone is honestly and sincerely trying to actually create dialogue to make something productive? Maybe that individual, if they have a history of not bringing something productive, is just trying to gaslight those who may now be exposed to their points of views. How do you make that decision of, okay, this hate speech is not necessarily what we think it is, versus, yes, this is an actual individual who's bringing gaslighting hate speech?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I think that just the individuals just kind of have to sort through that themselves. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to create a situation where people are afraid of speaking the truth or overlook an issue. And I'll use this as an example. I mean, Patton was preparing for World War II, doing some maneuvers, and people were just afraid to tell him that he didn't have some of the ammunition that he thought he did. But everyone was so they were going through maneuvers, getting ready to deploy, and then finally some lower level person in the organization spoke up and told him the truth. That's the kind of truth that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about I'm talking about people that are afraid to offend someone because they think that they won't like the answer. That's what I'm getting at. It's not necessarily where they think they'll be offended by the answer, and it goes back to the whole group think issue. Yeah.
Well, I would say, to use the military as an example, some of us who may be say for instance, if you're a lower enlisted or if you're a junior officer, but or you have a coworker who is working with you on the left and the right of you, some people are afraid to actually bring up and point out, bigotry that may be within the ranks, or, absolute, disrespect regarding dialogue, regarding diversity within the ranks, where now finally we're actually having somewhat of those discussions. But traditionally people are afraid, like, I better not say anything against platoon sergeant doing what they're doing, or my company commander doing what they're doing. What do we say to that young individual who may be afraid of being ostracized by his core group at a time where, a discussion or an actual honest comment is needed?
Yeah. Now, for me, and this is just based on some of the training that I went through because of the fortunate leaders that I had, I was encouraged early on to speak up, and I was put in situations where I was actually being tested as part of my training and part of my mentoring. Does this guy have enough courage to step up and tell me the truth, about things? And I think that should be part of our training regimen too. And whether it's role playing or but people need to see what kind of behavior is expected out of people that are in the military and elsewhere too. I think people are stronger in the military than they are outside the military sometimes, and from the standpoint of being able to kind of step up and tell their leaders the truth, and whether it's done behind closed doors or whether it's done publicly or whatever forms used, I think that it's important that it's done. And so I've seen this in a lot of different ways where people are just reluctant to address what I would consider obvious truths that are out there that need to be addressed in an organization. Someone's got to speak up, and many times it comes from it doesn't always come from the top. It doesn't always come from the people that are in the leadership positions, but that feedback frequently comes from people that are out there trying to make some things happen on the ground.
Got it. Thank you, sir. Let's go ahead and are you good with this slide? Do you want to jump into the next one?
We can jump onto the next one.
Okay. Oh, it looks like, actually, before we jump into that one, it looks like we have a comment that was posted on here. Let's go ahead and bring it up. The comment was, I think factual data should not be ever considered offensive, but if it is tainted with biases, that along with the delivery may be offensive.
I agree. I agree with that. And I think that's the trick, is we all have personal biases, every single one of us. And a lot of people will see, and we see this in the news all the time, we'll see two different spins, if you will, on data. So I think there's always biases, the personal biases that get in the way, and you just like you have people that sometimes see the cup half full, and other people see it as half empty, and neither one of them are necessarily wrong. So I think every single person needs to guard their biases, be aware of their personal biases as best they can, but that's not always the case. I think we are limited by our experiences, and I think we've all, over the course of our lives, developed biases. You're absolutely, whoever put them in this comment, you're absolutely right. I think factual data, and which I would consider the truth, factual data should never be considered offensive. And those that don't want to hear the truth, or there's resistance, those are the people that need to be told the truth. And that's kind of the gist of what I'm trying to get here. And someone should have stepped in. Going back to the George Floyd case, someone should have stepped in and said, "Hey, listen, this guy has been subdued. He's cuffed. He's on the ground." And maybe it could have been. I wasn't there, obviously, but the easy approach would have been, "Hey, hey, officer, let me take it from here," or whatever the case may be. Or it could have been, there were three of them, and so maybe they could have went in and done what they needed to do to save his life. But I absolutely agree that no one should be afraid of the truth, and no one should be afraid of the facts. and that's my biggest concern. And you see it. I'll talk a little bit about later, but sometimes you see it in business too, where people are reluctant to, tell the emperor they have no clothes, and that's really what we don't want to have happen.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and jump into the next slide, sir.
Yeah, and this is just along the lines of the same comment. I would also suggest that sometimes you shouldn't worry about someone's feelings, or be overly concerned with that. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be sensitive. I'm just saying that we should not allow ourselves to get in a position where we're overly concerned, and not passing on some critical information that's needed. It's just too easy. It's just too easy, and this is just based on my years of experience, both in the military and outside the military, just to be silent when someone should speak up. And so whatever we can do to encourage people to speak up when they need to, and whatever kind of training opportunities there are, for the people that we influence, we need to make sure they actually go through a training or get exposed to, and just be recognized that kind of behavior, stepping in and saying something is valued and it's supported, rather than having people quiet and timid and not willing to step up. And I do think that is an issue.
Excellent. Let's jump into the next slide.
So this just kind of gets to what where I'm at, and I realize I picked a yes man here in this particular case, but I was using 3 men as an example. But I think all leaders really want people that will tell them the truth and be willing to step in and when there may be something that they don't see or something that they're doing is inappropriate, or they may not fully understand the situation. And so in the process of not offending others or trying not to hurt someone else's feelings, we could end up stifling moral courage, and that's what we don't want to do. So I think there's a balance there, and we definitely don't want people that are more concerned about the people that they're talking to than they are about the critical issues at hand.
Roger that. Good point, sir. Let's jump into the next one.
Yeah. So this just goes back to my previous comment. How do you train individuals to kind of be willing and have the courage to step up and be a little bit different than everybody else? And I think we've seen several examples of that at the national level, where people may take a little bit different position than their peers or everybody standing in line with them. But I do think real change often comes from the bottom up, and that one person that's willing to step up and make a difference. And I'll kind of pause here before I move on to the next section. Any comments or thoughts on that from anyone?
Not from me personally. I think I've heard the terminology, nobody likes a good idea fairy. I've heard that terminology before in the military. Being fearful of presenting your differing point of view against everyone's point of view should be tempered with common sense.
Yep.
You shouldn't be totally outlandish in your point of view or your comments or your thoughts, but it should be at least the leader who's receiving the alternate point of view should be a person mature enough to actually be willing to accept that differing point of view. Because typically, those who rise in leadership have an ego. Everyone has an ego, but especially those who rise in leadership. That person who has risen in leadership may not be willing to hear from, who is this first lieutenant or second lieutenant coming around my way when I know everything that there is to know about X, Y, and Z. Yeah. So you need to have a mature person, a mature leader who's willing to actually hear a different point of view. And that, of course, that will encourage, you said the moral compass. What was that terminology you used again?
Probably moral courage is probably.
Yeah, moral courage. It will develop that moral courage within one's business or their leader.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something else. My first company commander told me. It's kind of tied to moral compass. But when I went into his office when I was early on, and I went into a meeting in his office, and he had me sign for his compass or sign. Well, I guess he didn't do the first. He he yeah, I guess he did. But first, I guess the first thing he did, I'm trying to think the sequence now, but the first thing he did, and this has kind of stuck with me, he had me read the Soldier's Creed, and then he said, Bob, the Army way is not always the best way. And then he had me read the Engineer Creed. It was an engineer unit, and I read that, and he said the engineer way is not always the best way. And then he made me sign for my compass, and so I signed for my compass, and he said, Bob, he goes, every great leader is guided by a good moral compass, and that stuck with me all these years. This is you mentioned that, and it came back to me, but I think we all have some sort of responsibility, whether people we interact with, to kind of pass on those kind of those kind of however you can connect with people that you're training and influencing, and that clearly made a mark with me. I think you need to, and this kind of goes back to one of the previous comments, and it really is all up to the individual, and you can't. It's not necessarily based on standards or some creed, or the Army way is not always the best way. The Corps of Engineer and the engineer way is not always the best way, people do have to kind of step up as an individual or as a leader, and sometimes make decisions or do things that they know in their heart is the right thing to do. And I think the more that we can encourage that and set that example, I think the better it is.
Excellent. Sir, let's go ahead and jump back into the slides. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay.
There are no new comments to be added as well. Okay. Jump into the next one.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit. I'm shifting gears now. I just want to talk about my transition from the military, and something that kind of was a shock to me. But and I think the Department of Defense has come a long way. About 50 years ago, I think we were having racial violence on board ships and Navy ships, and I think the Navy was one of the last services to kind of come on board with a solid diversity program. But on the USS Kitty Hawk in 1972, there were over 100 people involved with racial violence, and it's a major issue. And then 4 days later, there was another ship, a Navy ship that had some major issues. And we've come a long way since then, and it just undermined national defense. And in so many ways just undermined America's power. And I do think that we have a lot to be proud of, and a lot that we've accomplished over the last 50 years.
I got you, sir. And it's a shame that the actual active aggression regarding race and violence actually occurred in 72, but an actual recent study that came out showed how soldiers of color were typically given more frequent and harsher punishments for violations, etc., that may occur within the ranks. And this is not just an Army thing. This is a Navy thing. This is an Air Force thing. This is a Marine thing as well. So I understand your point of view where you said, okay, it's a shame that this happened in 72, but passive violence is still going on today. If you were in the position to create that change, what would you do to create that change?
Yeah, well, I think it has to. A lot of it has to go with just being aware of what's going on across the Army, and then I think every single leader has to step up, no matter where you're at, and realize that there's something bigger going on, and make whatever incremental changes you can and you can influence to kind of drive that. But you have to have the larger. I think all leaders have to have kind of larger strategic picture in mind, and then figure out what they can do to right whatever wrongs that are out there. And there are. I mean, sometimes it takes decades to make a change, and some things can be done quickly, and then sometimes it just takes a long time to make changes. And when we are the military, and I'll say we just because I still feel connected with the military, but we do represent our nation. I mean, we are. We have to work with the cards that we were dealt. And I was told a long time ago that You have to fight them as you find them. You know, however you end up, whoever you've got in your organization, and they all come from, you know, across the United States. You have to figure out how to build the team and make it work. And so we, you know, and things are not perfect in the United States. And so in the military, we have got to figure out, you know, how to take all the great Americans that we've got from a wide variety of walks of life, different experiences, different cultures, different ethnic backgrounds, and make it work. But I also think as a nation, we have a responsibility, an important responsibility to help shape corporate America. And I'll talk a little bit about that later.
Roger that. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump into the next one, sir. If you're fine with this.
Yeah,
you good to go with this one?
Yeah, jump on. And I know this is a little bit dated. This is from, you know, 5 years ago or so. But I do think that the United States Army has really has done a great job on putting together a diversity roadmap over the years, or a variety of roadmaps, and they've done a fantastic job, I think, of trying to implement them. Not perfect, but trying to implement it. And I think in 2015, you know, roughly 40% of our Department of Defense active duty military, you know, was, you know, represented racial and ethnic minority groups. And I think that's something to be proud of. And I think that it sets a great role model, a great model for the nation. And I think the United States Army really has a responsibility for contributing to a strong America, not just from the standpoint of who we have in the Army, but I think the Army has a responsibility to you know, shape our nation and make it a better nation, and really make it a nation where we provide leadership in the world. And I think the United States Army and the Department of Defense has done a pretty good job in many ways to get us there, and made a lot of progress over the years. But Otis, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're not you know, the United States Army and Department of Defense, we don't really touch people for the first 20 years that they're in their life, you know, or in life sometimes. And so there's a lot of other, you know, they just come with whatever background that they have and what biases they've developed. And then we have an opportunity in the Army to maybe have them, like with me, give them an opportunity to kind of see things from a broader perspective. And I clearly did when I joined the military. I think it was very helpful from an education standpoint to just get an appreciation for all the different types of people that were in the U.S. and different regions, and you know, and then I got an opportunity to see several different you know, places around the world too, and recognizing that, you know, we are, you know, the human race is really a complex group of people.
I would say, you know, to celebrate the Army is something that's personal to me. I believe personally that our military is probably more progressive than society as a whole. We're in a business, well, I said we're, yeah, I guess I could say we're, because I'm a civilian in the military as well. Equal pay for equal rank for equal amount of, you know, years. Say, for instance, if you have a certain amount of years and you are of a certain rank, you are assured to have the same amount of pay as male or woman, black or white, it doesn't matter. The things that recently were done in the military to address implicit biases. So say, for instance, the covering of the faces and the races when it comes to promotion boards, etc. And even, I believe, Secretary Esper, or is it, yeah, Secretary Esper has now recently addressed the flags being not permitted on military bases because of the history that comes with certain flags. And also people are addressing hair issues that may target a certain ethnicity versus another. So there are certain things that are being done by our modern military to address, you know, historical things that typically target minorities. Eventually, I do want them to address issues regarding, you know, the direct punishment of people of color who are dealing with, you know, typically more punishment versus someone who's not of color, etc. So I do recognize our military shortcomings, but I do celebrate the progressiveness that the military, the progression that the military has done for society and its members as a whole as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the department I think the Army, I think the Department of Defense has a lot of things to be proud of. Not perfect, and again, we work with the people that join our ranks, and so I think progressive is probably a very good word, Otis, that you use. I do think our Department of Defense, and they've had to. It's not just because they want to be progressive. I think for the Department of Defense to serve our nation and serve the world and be a role model for that it needs to be, and have the trust and confidence of the American people. There are things that it has done that I think that's why the Department of Defense and the U.S. military, I think, is held in such high regard across the United States, is because they know that we will do whatever we have to. It may not be perfect, it may not always be right, it may not always be the best solution, but we are an organization that really is trying to constantly improve and constantly be a good contributing partner or team member in our nation, and support everyone. And someone I think it was a recent Army birthday video that I saw, but someone made the comment on the video that when the United States Army shows up, they wanted everyone to know that their situation is going to get much better. And that's exactly the way, I think that the United States Army should be, whether it's someone joining the organization or whether it's, us performing our mission. We should be, and we have a responsibility to make everybody's situation a little bit better. And I know the Army clearly did in my life, and it has so many other people, and there's just so much good that could be done as long as we stay on this progressive path as you described, Otis.
I do remember, some historical images of United States Army being there to help regarding progression in racial relations, or being there to support those who are the trailblazers in racial progression. I can remember seeing the image in Arkansas, where the National Guard, I believe, was leading the young girl into the school, where some people there were not happy or even want to allow that little girl to attend that school, but the National Guard was there to actually support regarding the young girl, etc. So we have some questions coming up, so let's go ahead and pop up some of the questions as well. We've got one here saying, how long did it take for your progressive ways of thinking and dealing with people to be challenged by others?
Oh, my way of thinking is constantly challenged by others at times, and I think it's it's something you develop over a long period of time. I mean, I think people's thinking changes and their perspective changes, but I do think that we all feel pressure. We all feel pressure not to rock the boat, and I'll talk a little bit about it a little bit later. Or there's pressure, and I think it's a natural human pressure to become part of a tribe, and whether the tribe is around some professional sports team or it's developed around a unit patch, and we've all seen that. People from the 82nd Airborne hang around together. People from the 1st Cav Division hang around together. People from West Point, they may have some things in common, and we're all put in situations like that. And I think the important thing is that we deliberately work to not allow ourselves to be limited by that thinking, and fight that urge, and really deliberately do things to cultivate relationships with people that are not like you. It doesn't necessarily mean a different race or a different culture. It could just be maybe a different school, or someone that you would not normally hang around with, but you've got to force that. And I think we all have a responsibility to do that, and we'll all be better leaders, and we'll be better influencers. And in my mind, leadership is not about being in a formal leadership position. It's about influencing others, and I think we all are in a position to influence others. But my way of thinking is continuing to evolve over time, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that in a few minutes.
Okay, let's go ahead and put it back on full screen. And do you want to go ahead and jump ahead from this slide, sir?
Yeah, let's go on to the next one.
Okay, here's the next one.
Yeah, so you know, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but and this was taken 5 years ago, but I do think the U.S. military looks a lot like America. It's pretty darn close, and it's getting better all the time. And you know, I think that's something the Department of Defense and the U.S. military and the U.S. Army should be very proud of. And I think it's a very hard thing to do. And I know there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and it's not perfect at every rank and in every you know, career path, but it you know, there's clearly a lot of progress that's been made, and I think it's on a good trajectory, or has been over time. But next slide, I'll move on to the next slide. I really want to talk to you about what I experienced when I left the military. And you know, I left the military and joined an organization that had about 4,000 employees in it. I'm not going to give you the name. It's probably in my bio, but I'm not picking on them. I think it's just representative of what's out there. But what we ended up, when I joined the organization, what I ended up noticing right away, I noticed several things right away, but less than 1% of the organization was veterans. And so there were less than 30 veterans in the entire organization that had nearly 4,000 people. And it clearly didn't look like America. It clearly didn't look like the United States. And what I also, you know, by rights, it should probably have 5 or 6% of its employees veterans, and it had less than, you know, should have almost 200, and it had less than 30. And there were other groups that were underrepresented also. Visibly underrepresented in the organization. And what I found was that the organization had been around for a long time, had a great reputation, had great reputation of delivery, but it had formed in these circles, just kind of represent what had formed. But they formed employee resource groups, or
Looks like we have a little bit of a disconnect here. Okay, let's try to get him back on. Maybe having a little bit of a connectivity issue. Unless, okay, so stay with us, team. We're gonna go ahead and try to work through this connectivity issue. And let's get it back to the individual screen. Colonel Sinkler will be back, but it looks like we're having a little bit of a difficulty in connectivity. I know everyone had a chance to see some of the slides that we have, and I'm going to distribute these slides afterwards as well. But I'm hoping that you're enjoying the discussion up to now, where, you know, he's talking about the military lessons that he's learned. Now we're going to kind of go into now the human resources, things that he's seen and experienced. And I would assume that he would go into now the lessons that he got during his military time that he's now applied to his civilian side of work. And, you know, of course, being an individual who can do the right thing when those moments arrive is something that we must celebrate. So here we go. He's back at it again, and we're going to allow him to go ahead and share. Hey, sir, back at it again.
Yeah, sorry.
We're going to allow you to go ahead and continue human resources.
Yep. So let's go to the next. Let's go to the next slide.
Gotcha.
And what was really shocking to me was what I had grown so accustomed to, and what I had benefited from in so many ways from being a member of the Department of Defense in the United States Army did not exist in the corporate world. And I really, you know, I spent a lot of time on my free time just trying to correct what I thought was a situation where the organization that I was part of did not really represent or look like America. And so just some general guidance for every single one on this call is probably either in the military and will eventually leave, or working for the government and will actually sometime go work for corporate America, or they're already in corporate America. But I just think it's important that we take the lessons that we've learned from being in the Department of Defense and the United States Army and try and implement those. But I just want to really kind of highlight what I saw as a challenge, and that is all of these human resource groups and employee resource groups had formed around an identity, or kind of a tribal identity, if you will. And they ended up spending a lot of time, most of their time, focusing on advancing their tribe in the organization. And that became really problematic, because they were overlooking other needs for the organization. And clearly, less than, I'll just throw this out as an example, and there's numerous other examples, but clearly less than 13% of the organization was African American, for example. And I would go to meetings for the company I was in. There'd be several hundred people in the room, and I would only see one African American, for example. But there were other examples like that, and it just didn't look like America. And I soon came to the realization that forming human resource groups and having organizations just focus on advancing the people that look just like them is not really in the best interest of corporate America or this particular company. And so a lot of us just spend a lot of our free time just trying to get things back, get the ship righted again. So just quickly, and I'll wrap this up because I know I've been on the call for an hour, but
it's fine, sir. It's fine. Yep. I'm not limited. You're fine. You could go ahead and share your information.
Yeah, but I'm sure a lot of people are wanting to drop off, but or maybe they already have. But I just, I just think it's important that we focus or force groups to look out for others, and not necessarily their own people. So I think it's important to take the different employee resource groups or human resource groups that kind of naturally develop in your organization and assign them to be mentors and for other organizations, and help other types of groups advance in the organization and help in the recruiting of some of those other groups that may not be appropriately represented. And then I think cross-group mentorship is absolutely critical. When I joined the military, it was just seemed natural for me to be trained by people that didn't look like me all the time. I just, it was just a natural way of, just seemed natural for me, but that's not always the case. And I think it's important that a deliberate mentorship program be established, and you really force people in your organization to mentor, coach, train people that don't necessarily look like them or are not in their own resource group. And then the third thing I would just encourage people to do is force integration on projects. And I'm not talking about integrating people at a social event but I'm talking about actually forcing people to work together on projects. And it's more difficult with the COVID-19 situation, but the actual face-to-face personal interaction to actually deliver projects or do something for the company where you get to know one another truly at the individual level, I think is absolutely key. And I think those kind of opportunities have to be forced. But
do we have a next slide, sir? Or is this the last?
I got a final slide, and then if there are any final questions.
Okay. No questions. Well, I have one more question that was proposed by Mr. Matt Novak, but let's go ahead and bring it up. All right, so let's go back to this one. And Mr. Matt Novak, he asks, and this is a more military question, but as a retiree and as myself, I think I could chime in on this a little bit as well. The question is, Colonel Sinkler, hope all is well. What are your thoughts on President trying to deploy active duty troops in Washington, D.C., as well as General Milley appearing in the church photo?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is a Matt Novak that I know, but anyway, I do know a Matt Novak. But yeah, here's my thoughts. I think deploying military, active military forces in domestic issues to resolve or be part of domestic issues in the U.S. Should always be a last resort. And I think historically in our nation's history, it probably has. And I just think that's a good practice. If there's other capability to address those kind of issues, they need to. I do think, and I'll go back to something I said earlier, I think when the United States Army shows up, I think everybody that's there should feel like their situation is going to get better. And I think there have been situations that have occurred over the last few weeks or a few months where if the Army showed up, there would have been people in there that would have felt like their situation may have not gotten better. I think So I think it's important to use the appropriate tool. And I also, and just to kind of jump on your last comment here, that last comment that was made. I think senior military leaders have to really guard against being perceived as being political, and that's the United States Army has. We were here, we were in existence, and I say we just because I feel like I'm still a soldier in many ways, but we were in existence a year before our nation was created, and I do think we have an obligation to protect our nation and protect our Constitution. And I think whatever we can do to avoid any kind of political entanglements in any direction, I think is absolutely key for our reputation and for us to be able to do our job. So
absolutely, absolutely. You got my answer, sir.
Okay.
I appreciate you sharing that. Let's go ahead and jump back into the slides itself. And you've got, is this the final slide, sir?
Yeah, this was just open for any kind of final comments or discussion. So
gotcha.
Nothing to say here unless there's anything else I need to address.
So there are no new comments or questions that are posted on the discussion panel area that we have here, but it's something to celebrate where, common sense is something that we should probably use. Try to be apolitical as much as we possibly can if you're in the military. Celebrate diversity. Diversity is our strength. And also celebrate bringing different points of views that may counter your point of view. As long as that point of view kind of creates a progressive movement to allow a mission to be accomplished or to allow diversity to be welcomed into a discussion. But that's mainly my point of view and my gist of what I've gotten from our discussion today, sir. Well, what about you?
Yeah, I just want to just one final comment. I mean, the United States of America is a nation about tomorrow. It's never been a nation about our past, and there's just it's a wonderful future I think that we have, and we need to stay focused on that because you can get drugged down into a lot of history and a lot of things that have gone in the past that really cause us to lose sight of where we can actually go as a nation. So I think moving forward and focusing on tomorrow is where we all can go, and we can all probably make the biggest change, have the biggest impact, as long as we keep focused on where our nation needs to go and what kind of perfect union we need to really create in this wonderful country that we're in.
It's an imperfect experiment, but it's a beautiful nation. So it's something myself as an immigrant coming to the U.S., I celebrate and I appreciate. It's something that many of us who are native born here celebrates and appreciates. We have a lot of place to go. We have a lot of direction to move forward to, but it's something that I would encourage. If you do plan on being part of this beautiful nation, celebrate what we've got, know that it's imperfect, and be part of the voice to create that change progressively. But sir, I just want to say, thank you for participating in the discussion. We had over an hour of time just talking and sharing points, and I think you and I had a great time, and of course the participants in the discussion as well.
Hey, Otis, great to see you again, and I'm glad we connected recently, and I enjoyed it. So have a great weekend.
Absolutely. Sir, if you could hang out in the broadcast room, I'd appreciate it. Sure. Let's talk a little bit, okay, sir?
Yeah, sure.
All right. And so today's discussion, I really enjoyed it. I really just had a good time just talking to my old battalion commander, getting to learn his moral compass as far as his mentality moving forward. I think it's going to create more opportunities for us to have these conversations, myself and him anyways. And of course, if you want to reach out to him, send him a message on social media as well. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, and take care of others. Bye now.